Hello, y'all. Welcome to the Voice Clinics podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Sanders, family physician. Today, our guest is Jacob Heninger. He's really a fun guy. He's not into mushrooms like I am, but he's still a fun guy. Jacob is our medical interpreter for Spanish in our office. He's a medical assistant. He also does all kinds of managerial work there. And he's prepping for medical school as well. So he graduated from BYU with a major of Spanish, correct?
Yes.
And then what was your minor?
My minor was pre-med, so I didn't have one, but
yeah,
that's it.
But that's a lot of work. That's a lot of extra minoring.
Yes.
I think mine was sports medicine at UNLV. And then I minored in like biochem because I took so many chemistry classes. It was like one extra class to minor in biochem. Well, that's really cool. Welcome to the podcast, Jacob. Jacob is also, you also serve the role of helping us at podcast coordinator and helping a lot with the podcast and stuff. And you've been a real gem for the clinic and everything. So
awesome.
Thanks for hanging with me today. We were just kind of nerding out a little bit before this podcast and talking about things that I wanted to talk about for a long time. Before we go there, I want to just say that today was a little bit of a hard day for me. I got to drop off my daughter Priya at the Missionary Training Center for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And she will be going to Rome, Italy in a couple, like 4 or 5 weeks. She's training for a few weeks in language and things, and then she'll go there. I served a mission back like 1998, way back in the day, in Taiwan. And Jacob, where did you serve?
Oaxaca, Mexico.
So yeah, we're just, it's kind of a tradition in the church where folks will go. Boys are usually about 19 years old and go for a couple years. And it was really cool for me, just mind opening to live in and experience a different culture. It created a lot of insight for me and an ability to change my thinking and my mind. Culturally, I grew up in a very small town in Nevada, very rural, very just rural culture. And the diversity of cultures, I think, helps us be able to have some mental flexibility. We'll go into that in a little bit. What was it with your mission? Was it similar? How did that kind of help you?
Yeah, I think it not only did it expose you to kind of a different way of living, a different way of thinking about life, but I also think that it was really good at teaching me that a lot of the problems that I think or thought were things that people cared about or really cared about in the world, it's not really that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And it kind of, I feel like in some ways it helped me grow up. Bless you.
Thanks. Salud.
I feel like it helped me grow up a little bit. And I feel like that I learned from others how they really just tackled life and that their priorities were different enough for me to understand that maybe my priorities could change and didn't have to be set in stone. Yeah.
So just creating some neuroplasticity, some ability to recalibrate your thinking just a little bit. My daughter, she was in college for a year. She played lacrosse. And I think she got quite out of her typical routine, her typical balance, emotionally, mentally, physically. She got into some good routines and then she got out of routines. I just saw her kind of like struggle a little bit, and it compromised her immune system. She got sick more. Same thing happened to me. When I went to UNLV, I got really sick. I was up later than I usually am. It was wild. So, we'll spare some details there. But it was, I just felt off balance a lot. The curriculum, you're pushed in this direction, pushed in that direction, and you're just kind of always a little bit off balance. As she has kind of locked into her mission mode, it's been really cool to watch her just lock it in. I mean, missions are pretty rigid. They got a lot of rules. They don't, not a lot of cell phone time, not a lot of distraction, not a lot of this and this. You really commit your heart and your mind to like serving God for 2 years. In her case, it'll be 18 months. But it's been really cool to see just simple things that she has dialed in and how she's kind of rebalanced herself. And so when I was getting ready to go on my mission, we all got Chinese names, right? And my last name is Sanders, so they gave me the last name of Sun, which is a very common Chinese last name. And then we got to kind of like pick our first names, basically. So they say their last name first and then their first names. And in Taiwan, they often have three characters as your name. And so there was a guy in my district whose middle name was Yi, and he was Cantonese. And so we all chose the same middle name because it's a tradition in their families to have the same middle. So anyway, we all have the same middle. So my Sun Yi, and then I got to pick my last character. And the character that I picked was balance, Heng, and Ping Heng de Heng. And what that means is just finding balance in life. And it was something that I was like, I like that in my Chinese name. And it's something that I want better in my life. I found myself off balance a lot. So let's talk about balance, and let's talk about, striking balance in our lives in multiple areas. So one area you mentioned was kind of food, and kind of speak to that area. Like, what do you mean by balance in our food, our consumption?
Well, I feel like this applies to a lot of people, and I felt like I had to learn this when I was first starting off my college experience as a pre-med. Yeah, in college, you're so busy, you've got a job, and then with the pre-med classes, you're trying to get as good of grades as you can and try and keep up with everybody else. And so there's not a lot of time, and it's you start to look for corners to cut to try and make up for extra time, to give you just a little more time to study. And sometimes that includes things like food. So I can think of times where I think one time, maybe not one time, it was probably multiple times, where I did like mozzarella sticks for dinner, and that's it. And that is not a great balanced dinner, and probably not very healthy in the long grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
And it probably didn't help me do well in my classes either. I felt like at this time where I wasn't eating right, that I would study. I put all this time into studying, and it wouldn't be as effective as if when I learned later that if I learned to just take time and make an actually balanced meal with vegetables and with fruit, then I ended up being able to study better, and I didn't need to study as much to do as well.
That's really good. I bet your colon was much happier with the fruits and vegetables added to those cheesesteaks too.
Yeah, it was not a good time.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That's really cool. I think it's really difficult to strike a balance in our diets because there are so many addicting foods and addicting substances in our American diet in general. It's very easy for it to swing into an overly junky direction. And we're also very busy. We're also, all the other reasons. So I just think it's so important to just look at your diet. I recommend my patients sometimes to count calories for a week. Do it for a week as an exercise, an accounting exercise, and just see where your calories are coming from. And then know that what you're actually counting that week is probably 30% different than what you actually ate the week before. Because there's studies that when people start counting calories, they actually change.
They get scared.
They don't want to be like, oh, I don't actually do that. But just recognize that and recalibrate and look at it and say, is this making me happy? Is this, creating joy in my life? And then move into that direction. I will say finding balance is more, if we can just maintain a general optimistic viewpoint, I think that's very helpful. I've always been very positive. Just like a very positive person. And if we can maintain that optimism as we navigate some of these challenges, I think it will help us with despair. Sometimes it's easy to despair, like in our diet, in our weight, in our physique, whatever. Physically, I think sometimes we can have an imbalance there too. So whether it's, I'm overly thin, I'm overly heavy, maybe I'm really, 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 really strong, or maybe I'm really not flexible, or maybe our bodies kind of need a big balance of a bunch of different things to feed them, but also to kind of move through things. And so I don't know, I think finding balance with our bodies is really important too. Are there tricks that you have done, like to strike that balance with you guys, with you and your wife, and maybe your guys' culture or anything?
Oh yeah. For sure. I think when we got married, one of the biggest things that I guess a lot of people, when they get married, this is what they go through too.
Jacob looks like he's 16, but he's actually, not 16.
No, I wish I was 16, but no.
Yeah, I mean, you're married and you just look like you're really young.
Yeah. So when my wife and I first got married, I kind of went in assuming like, oh, well, this is how I did things growing up and this is how things were. So this is how we're going to do them. And I quickly found out that that's not how my wife did things. And so we did things differently. And I think all the time I kind of viewed it as like this, where you compromise and you're trying to balance between the two and maybe come up with some new ideas. But my wife and I ended up taking a marriage enhancement class at BYU together. And
sounds next level. Let's enhance this marriage.
It was really good. It enhanced the marriage.
Only at BYU.
Only at BYU.
I don't think that class is offered anywhere else in the nation. That's a wonderful class. Sounds awesome. What was it about?
So it was about all kinds of marriage like problems that you come across and like how to navigate those. And one of those was like culture between two different families coming together. And what they said is when you create a new family, it's like you have a new pot and you can choose to fill it with soil from one family and soil from another family. But you really shouldn't view it that way. You should view it as we're going to make our own soil together and then put it into the pot. Because if you view it as bringing in the other, like one's from here, one from here, it turns into like a game of like, oh, well, we did this, so we're going to do this here. Or even like you can feel
tug of war,
almost.
Tension.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And you end up counting little pieces here and there, as opposed to if you just decide to do a new thing together and then just choose whatever works for both of you, it ends up working a lot better.
That's cool. That's really cool. Physically, I've always been an athlete. I've played multiple sports and it helps me to have a group. I've always played team sports mostly. And so I'm like a social exerciser. So for years, I just played sports. And it turned out that was not very smart. And you would think I'd know this because my major was sports injury management. It was like athletic training. So they talk about athletes, weekend warriors, who that's all they do is play sports. They never strengthen. And so there I was, finding myself, in my early 40s, late 30s, and I started having some injuries. And I thought, okay, roll it back to your undergrad of, sports medicine. And when injuries come, it's from weakness. And so I was pushing my body and I had certain muscle groups that were really strong because I was just sprinting, playing soccer, playing volleyball, playing basketball and jumping and doing all these things. And then there were other muscle groups that were just non-existent and they were just gone. And so I ended up having to spend about a year. My knees really started bugging me. I gave myself what's called patellofemoral pain syndrome. It's where your lateral quad is really strong and all four of your quadricep tendons or muscles, that's the front of your leg, they come together into the quadricep tendon and then they actually encapsulate your patella, your kneecap, and then they form the tibial or the patellar tendon, and that inserts on your greater tuberosity of your tibia down on your lower leg. Well, I was having some problems in my knees and it was all these tendons because my lateral quads were super strong from sprinting, jumping. Medial quads were like gone. They were gone. And so I gave myself patellofemoral pain syndrome where that patella tracks laterally because those lateral muscles are so strong. So I had to stretch those muscles and strengthen those medial muscles. And it took me almost 12 to 18 months of consistently strengthening those legs to really fix it. And now I have zero knee pain. But boy, it was miserable at the time. So when things are off balance in our lives, there's often some suffering that comes with that.
Yeah.
And so from a physical standpoint, I'm 46 now and I'm like recalibrating my physical prowess. And how do I maintain the dad bod, but maybe like get rid of the dad bod at the same time, but also, within reason, like do some exercise. And I do a lot of stretching, a lot of yoga, and then some strengthening as well. And then I've kind of minimized my sports a little bit. had to roll back and just strike a better balance, right?
Yeah.
So I've noticed my body's better now. I'm stronger, faster, more flexible. And so it's just a matter of committing the time, being mentally aware. So if your bodies are hurting or whatever, or whether it's physically or whatever, like you may want to look at your balance of your muscles. And so when people come into the office, they'll have back pain or whatever, and we're looking at their balance of, their core strength to their back, to their legs, to their psoas muscles. There's all these muscles that play a role in injuries and pain. And so physical balance is really, really important. We talked a little bit about eating, finding, better habits and better balance and those things, diet, exercise. Let's talk about maybe hobbies. There are sometimes we get fanatical in a hobby like pickleball. I don't know. I mean, that just comes to mind. There are a lot of pickleball fanatics out there, including this guy. No. So, I too am an alcoholic. I'm a pickleball-aholic. I mean, it is really tough. It's a fun sport. And so it's so fun. You just want to play it all the time. And then it's easy to, again, just to lose balance in life. Like maybe you've pursued this too hard, so there's some intellectual space that's declining or spiritual space. And so it's, to me, like there's like physical, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual spaces that we got to kind of continue to look at. And for me, music as well. And so just continue to kind of calibrate and recalibrate all those spaces to maintain that balance so that you have a balanced life, Renaissance kind of life that you can continue to grow in all those spaces.
Yeah. I think what I've done for my strategy is I try and, if it's something that I really care about, I try and do 30 minutes a day. But this kind of leads into a question I have, because you've gone through med school and you've gone through these times where it's like you wake up and you study and then you go to sleep, right? And so what would you do during those high stress times to try and find balance? Or is it possible, or do you kind of have to make some sacrifices?
Yeah, this is a good question. There is no balance in med school. There's no balance in residency. You are grinding hard. I love music. I play and sing the guitar, and I sing. And man, it took a real backseat to my whole thing. I would still play, but I didn't get any better.
Just maintained it.
Like, as good as I was in high school. And so it was just really tough. I mean, it is very demanding as a profession. It's very demanding as an education. Understandably so. I mean, you're dealing with people's lives. You're dealing with very, very sacred ground when you're dealing with helping people navigate life emotionally, physically. It's demanding. And so, what I did was, my wife is an angel. I married an angel. That was helpful. She was like the med school widow, the residency widow. We were having kids all along the way, and she was doing most of the work there. What I did was I needed stress outlets. And so I'm a kinesthetic learner mostly. So I would sit down and study. And then when I read the same paragraph 5 times and I still didn't get what it was saying, I would go play a sport. So I would go hit some ping pong balls, or I'd play basketball or go play soccer. And then I would go study for a couple hours. And so that for me was just probably more of a sanity thing than it was a balance thing. But yeah, I would just try to make time for those things. And the other thing that I did was balance family, because, I did have children in med school and in residency, and a lot of my colleagues didn't, and they could just grind. And then, they didn't have to go home and tuck in a kid or, change some diapers or any of that stuff. And so, I had to let go of some of my super type A thinking, right? And so most med students, pre-meds and doctors and stuff are pretty type A heavy. But I had to just be okay being middle of the pack to, I wasn't a dummy. I didn't fail any of my tests or anything, but the margin to get like a B to like an A, or even an A to like an A plus, is like another 20 hours of study.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I've got church responsibility, I got family responsibilities, I got other things in life that I'm trying to balance. And honestly, it's fine. It's made me a well-rounded physician. And, you continue to learn throughout your whole career. Have you experienced some of the lack of balance with some of your educational demands in undergrad at all?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And what have you done for some of that stuff?
I think the first thing I always had to do was kind of step back and reevaluate what I really cared about. Because I think sometimes it's easy to get in my head and be like, okay, I gotta be number one in the class. I gotta do this. And if I want to get to this med school, I gotta do this and this. And so you kind of get in the habit of, I'm just going to do it no matter what. And then I would have to reevaluate and say, do I really want to do that at the sacrifice of losing out on other things? So for example, like my wife and I have talked about how sometimes when times were busier for me, like when I was studying for the MCAT, I did no house chores at all. And it was fine because it was a short period of time, but long term, that's not a good balance for what I wanted to do with my wife. I don't want my wife to feel like I just study all day and I'm not even there to help out a little bit with anything. So I had to reevaluate when I started classes back again. I tried my best to put the classes on the back burner sometimes in order to focus more on chores. And I still didn't do it perfect. I'm sure she can talk more about my shortcomings, but I think I had to really ask myself, what did I care more about?
To this day, I am terrible at loading the dishwasher. My wife often redoes it when I do it. I'm like, babe, I tried. Like, what do you mean? Like, what are you doing?
You and I are in the same boat. If I got banned from washing the dishes for a year. Yeah. Because every time I would do it, my wife would be like, nope, you didn't do it right. No. I have to redo it. Yeah. So you might as well do something else. So.
My kids and I, we have a joke. We say, is your room clean? Yeah. Is it mama clean? No. Okay, go back and clean your room again. Is it Papa clean? Oh yeah, totally fine with Papa, but not Mama clean. That's really cool. I love it. I think that just finding the importance of balance in our lives. I really like what you said, where you just kind of step back and just make a list of the important things in your life. And then make sure that you're committing time, energy, and effort in those areas. And I like your idea of just putting 30 minutes aside and committing 30 minutes to that practice of whatever you want to develop. That's more like habit forming and awesomeness. But I like that in the fact that it can help you, if you're off balance in one direction or the other, maybe just commit 30 more minutes over here. The balance killers out there, what are they? What are the things that like destroy our abilities to find good balance in our lives?
I think work, school, education, career kind of things. Yeah. I think that's the number one killer of balance, right?
Yeah.
I think we see that everywhere.
We're in a very capitalist society. There is no concept of work-life balance in America in general. In Europe, like you look at these countries that are thousands of years old instead of hundreds of years old, they're way better at it. They've got a better routine. They're good at taking holiday. They're just good at doing that. 6 weeks of holiday a year, and they take every day of it and they go do things with their families. And it's just expected. And so nobody's expected to just keep grinding and not have a decent balance of things that are important in their lives. In America, we are very grind centric, right? We're like, no, you got to fanatically go do this thing if you want to succeed in America. It also makes it wonderful because you can really grow and be awesome in America. But it's also tough to find that work-life balance financially, but also emotionally in all those spaces. So that's, just really good. So let's just keep it a practice of just striking a balance. I want to segue just a little bit into another space, which is similar to this, because we mentioned several times in like finding a balance requires a degree of emotional intelligence to be able to like be emotionally aware and intellectually aware of what's going on in our lives. And are we okay with that? And do we want to change that? And if we can't change it right now, well, we'll grind like we did through med school, residency, etc. And then we'll find a balance as we go along. That requires some degree of mental flexibility, some degree of willingness to change the way I'm doing things, right? Like, I don't really like that I'm not participating in the home as much as I should. I'm going to commit more time in that direction. So that's a willingness to just be mentally flexible. I want to talk about this space because I think right now we're in a very kind of a critical time in America where we have a lot of emotionally and intellectually not flexible thinking and people. And then we have a lot of forces at work to create more polarized thinking and more dogmatic stuckisms in our brains. Like, this is the only way that's right. And then there's group thinks that then keep us there and then shame us from changing our mind. You know, oh, they switched their thinking on that thing that makes them a bad person. Gosh, like, I really hope that I can change my mind a lot throughout my life. I might think this is important or that's important. And it changes, it recalibrates, and it's okay. It doesn't make me a wishy-washy human. It just makes me actually a very, I would say, aware person. Like, what's going on? What do I need to recalibrate here? Let's go here a little bit. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, just building on that, I think if you go through life and you don't change your opinion about things, it shows you're just very dogmatic in some aspects, and you're not really aware of how things change, because things do change in the world and things change with people too. So you have to be able to accept that change is going to happen, and you have to be able to accept in yourself that you're going to change too, probably.
Kids are so good at this. So I've delivered a bunch of babies for over 10 years, and then also, taken care of kids for many, many years. And then I have my own kids, and the small children are awesome at this. They're so mentally neuroplastic. Their neuroplasticity is super, super high. They can literally think this is 1000% true and then shift their brain and say, no, it's not true at all. This is now true. And that's really cool. That's a really, really cool thing. I hope I can maintain that throughout my life.
Yeah.
Just that willingness to change and grow. My wife shared with me one time an article about rural people who grow up in rural towns tend to have a certain thinking process, a certain thought process, and a certain way of viewing the world and themselves. And it tends to be more on the conservative side of things, because that's just, I grew up in a really rural town, and my dad was very, very, very conservative. And he was to the point where one year he didn't share his tax information with me because he didn't want me taking no damn handout from the government. And I'm just like, okay, Dad, all right. So you got to work for your living, and I think that's his thinking, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, Dad, I'm going to pay this all back in dividends, it's going to work out for the government. I promise. I'm not just stealing from the government here. But he didn't want me taking a handout.
Yeah.
He was stuck in that thinking to the point where it was maybe radicalized a little bit, he was unwilling to relent on that. Couldn't see it from my perspective, where I'm like, Dad, I'm just going to pursue this education, get a better job, and pay it all back. No big deal. And he could not see it that way. And so, I think the rural folks, my wife shared with me this article on how folks from like rural towns would go to the colleges and those places and get educated, and then grow to appreciate and understand a more liberal way of thinking. And then they can have conversation back and forth and like have this meaningful conversation. Doesn't make them liberal, doesn't mean they've been liberalized, but it means they're more open-minded to a way of thinking that is different from theirs, and they don't hate them.
Yeah.
Like, isn't that cool? She said that, interestingly, in the article, the opposite doesn't happen, which is, I think, a travesty. I would love it if the city boys would come to my town and just live there for 4 years, education, and just see what that is, live among the rural folks and see what that means to work and not to work. That sounds like city folks don't work, but what it is to like work on our farm and buck hay and, you know, take care of animals and milk goats and skin a cow. Like I grew up doing all that stuff. And I don't think the city folks get an appreciation for that kind of a life. There's no education that does that for them. But the rural folks do get that. And so I think right now there's some polarizing influences in our communities. I see fake accounts on Facebook, Instagram and stuff
all the time.
And they're literally just polarizing accounts. When they ask to friend me, I always go and I look at what they're doing, and it's all like these like polarizing comments to like polarize you this way or that way. And I see some of them polarize me in a conservative direction. Some of them try to polarize me in a liberal direction. I think it's so important for us to just be mentally aware of the forces at work on the minds of our children, on our minds, that there are forces at work that are deliberately trying to polarize us as a nation. And those are destroying forces. They're not helpful in any way. Man, I don't know. Have you seen any of that?
Oh yeah. I think a lot of the times I'm seeing posts about things, and sometimes I'll go in and the event took place like 6 years ago and it's just getting posted again because it stirs up controversy. And I think I heard from somewhere, and I don't remember where, but they did a study where they found that if you post something happy or positive, people see it and they reflect on it and they repost it or they share it with other people, and then eventually it dies and people don't share it anymore because it's just reached its end and everybody's been satisfied with it. But if you share something controversial or something that makes you mad, you don't let go of it and you keep reposting and you keep circling back to it. So it can kind of create this endless loop where something that was shared and started 6 years ago stays on the internet for so long because it keeps getting brought into people's mind. And then 6 years later, it shows back up again in the same space where it was before. And it makes people mad again. And if you were to do that with like a silly cat video, silly cat video doesn't stick around that much.
Right.
So
yeah, I'm largely a positivity poster. I'm just like, this cool thing happened in my life. I'm like, it's like my giant scrapbook, you know? But yeah, it's funny that some of those controversial things, they are triggering. And so they hit our emotion centers so deeply. And then they create more of that negative emotion. And then the comments on some of those are just
unbelievable. I sometimes look at those and I'm like, there's no way someone would say that in person to another person. That's just, it's so inflammatory. You'd expect a fight to break out almost with those words. And it's just so common to find.
I wonder if social media, okay, the answer is yes. Social media plays a polarizing influence in our lives. Sometimes if we allow it to, but I think even, I don't want to say subconsciously, but in a very sneaky way.
Yeah.
So we just have to be cognizant of that and be aware. Again, like when I post comments on people's things, I'm always upbeat. I'm always positive, and luckily, I think it's stayed true to my algorithms. So I usually get pretty decent. I have a reasonable time on some of those platforms that I try not to spend too much time on. My wife doesn't. She doesn't mind calling this and that, and so then she's like, yeah, my feed is just full of blah blah blah, and I'm like, well, maybe that's you commented that way, and so then it put more of that stuff in front of you.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh yeah, you're right. So I'm not a crusader in any way on any of those things. I'm like, oh, cool. That's a cool thing that you put there. And then I just move along. So what do we do when we're getting polarized? How do we be cognizant of that? I think this ties into our bias talk a little bit. We did a nice talk with Derek and you on bias, and how do we kind of like be cognitively aware that it's even happening?
So I think something that I learned that's helped me in more than just in forming relationships with people is, I think it was Dr. John Gottman who said,
Gottman,
he's a
this
guy. He said that anger is like a blinder almost. And they've done a lot of tests to suggest that when you're angry at something, you could present something that'll totally dissipate the anger right in front of you, and you'll just ignore it because you're mad and you want to stay mad. And so you kind of have to take up to at least 30 minutes to let go of that anger. And that's really hard to do, especially with social media, right? Like everything is instantaneous. No one's going to, if you're already on social media, you're probably waiting in line for something, and you got to take 30 minutes to just not look at social media or something, or not focus on what's making you mad, and then take a deep breath and then go back into it and try and logically look at it. Because once you get angry, then you're angry already, and it's too late. You can't look at it without bias.
You're in a firefight. Yeah, you're just wanting to strike out and then defend and then strike out again. So it sounds like just some mindfulness. Take some time to breathe, look away, take a walk. Similarly, if you're in a dispute with your wife or something and you're 100% sure you're right and you're mad about it and she's right and she's mad about it, maybe like just walk away for a bit. Hey, baby, let's just talk about this in 30 minutes. I need to go breathe for a bit. Give yourself some time and space and think about it. I don't know that the average American's focus ability is that high. What is it, like 3 seconds? The average, like, what is it? The reels and the TikTok things, they're like every 3 seconds, something's changed. Yeah. So your brain is like really, really hardwired to be attention deficit, and I will say mindful deficit. So it contributes to this degradation of cognitive awareness and emotional intelligence, frankly. And so we just become emotionally cavemen, literally emotional cavemen. And we're firing back and forth at each other, and we're hitting each other with clubs, and we're throwing fire sticks at each other. It's like, what's going on out there? So I love that. I think maybe just pull away from those spaces, the social media space, breathe, take time to gratitude journal. I mean, that's very, very effective at maintaining neuroplasticity and maintaining a willingness to just think differently, ponder, and allow just light and truth to enter your brain. Like, that's just not influenced by any other probing body. I don't know. Those are kind of some of my thoughts. Sometimes we get emotionally stuck. I see people that are stuck in a way of thinking that is harming them emotionally. So there's 3 that I see that are very, very common. Number 1, comparing yourself to others. So it's almost creating like, man, if only I was as good as, man, I'm not as awesome as. And what that does is it creates a little envy, and then it creates a little bit of anxiety around not being good enough, a sense of lack of self-worth. I'm not as blank as that person. I am therefore am less than that person. And social media magnifies this thought process times thousands fold.
To the nth degree.
Yeah. Look at how perfect their life is. Look how perfect that picture was. Look how perfect their wedding was. Look how perfect their smile is. Look at, and I'm like, dog, like, all that's AI generated. It's not, but there's a lot of AI generated crap now. Dude, that's a whole nother topic we got to talk about, but not right now. But I guess my point is that this as good as thinking, this stuck emotional thought process leads to a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of panic attacks. And it's just not healthy. It's super not healthy at all.
Yeah.
People get stuck in it.
Yeah. It was like, I can speak from experience that when I graduated from high school, I applied for my mission, and I wasn't supposed to go out for several months. So all I did was find a job wherever I could. I was working in a recycling center, which is not the nicest job on planet Earth. It was a lot of work, heavy hours. There was one time the AC wasn't working, so it was hot. It was just miserable. And I would come home and I'd go on Instagram, and all my friends would be out at college, or they'd be on the beach, and they'd be doing all kinds of fun things and moving on. Felt like they were moving on with their life. And I felt like I wasn't moving on with my life, and I was just kind of stuck waiting. And I kind of had to just take a step back. I stopped using social media for a time, because I'm like, if I just keep looking at this, I'm going to trick myself into thinking that my life's not moving forward. And it is. I'm just waiting for the next step. So, and I think once I did that and I realized that it really doesn't matter the timing, it really helped me to recognize that it really doesn't matter what people post. They're always trying to put their best foot forward online. It's kind of like if the queen was going to come over and eat at your house, obviously you're going to like clean up. You're going to make sure everything's perfect. But that's not really how life is for you. You're just kind of put up a facade or an image. So I think I had to recognize that from my own point, that just because someone posted online, it doesn't mean that's what's really going on.
That's a pretty high degree of emotional awareness. Most teens, I mean, we've all been stuck in that, by the way. I will say you're not unique. Every single one of us, we have a very competitive environment, very competitive. BYU's a very competitive pre-med program. You've got these competitors out there and they're always trying to be better than, or, never want to be less than. And so we're kind of almost programmed a little bit for it. And then add to that this social media where look how crappy my life is and look how awesome all these other people's lives are. And dang it, like it can really harm you. And what would you say you felt emotionally at those kind of lower times?
I kind of felt angry. Like, why am I doing this? I'm just going to go out and do my own thing. Cause I'm waiting for this. I felt a little even sad. Like I don't compare to them. And I think it's really funny because it ended up being a really good experience. I'm really happy with how things turned out with retrospect, and I wouldn't have done it any other way. So it ended up being a really positive force in my life. But at the time, it was really hard. It kind of felt like I was in a ditch almost, and I was just stuck. Yeah. I think stuck is the best way I would describe it.
Totally. So that's what I'm talking about. When you get stuck in one of those things, having what you had, which is the emotional awareness to navigate that is pretty cool, but lots of folks don't. So I would say if you are stuck in that space, look at it. If you're frustrated, if you're lacking self-confidence, self-worth, look at that and say, am I comparing myself to others? How large is envy in my life? Am I envious of all my friends who are going on to college and doing all these cool things and I'm not, right? Or they're all getting married and I'm not, or they're all getting whatever's and I'm not. Is there that in your life? And that can be a really negative force to make you feel worthless, make you feel less than, make you feel anger, frustration, sadness, for sure. The other one that I see people get stuck in is, oh my gosh, what if, right? It's like this fear of uncertainty, fear of the future. Oh my gosh, what if thinking is 1000% going to drive you toward anxiety land. And so people sometimes will get stuck in this, oh my gosh, what if? And again, like just recognizing I'm oh my gosh, what ifing, and is that real? And if it's not real, can I disregard it? I will say this is using frontal cortex to kind of fix emotion centers. And this is, maybe some principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's only sometimes effective. So I have a client right now who was paralyzed and oh my gosh, what if? Paralyzed. And it's true that if you think that way long enough, it actually changes chemistry in your body, in your brain, downregulates serotonin and dopamine. And that depressed state is low serotonin state. And so one of the things that we try to do to help with this is we give them a serotonin reuptake inhibitor to increase serotonin in your brain, just to make the chemistry okay there. While they're doing that, we got to recalibrate that, oh my gosh, what if tendency that they're doing. And that's a hard thing to do, but often with a professional therapist and do all that. But yeah, oh my gosh, what ifing is another one that I see people get really, really stuck in. And it is very, very difficult. It's like my processor, my whole life has always been, oh my gosh, what if? My parents did that. My parents' parents did that. And now I do it. And how do you get rid of generational, oh my gosh, what ifing? Like we all have had panic attacks. We're all on SSRIs. We all have, these things. And there is a degree that is reasonable. You should have some degree of, oh my gosh, what if in your life? You see these videos of these people feeding grizzly bears in Yellowstone, and you're like, Your oh my gosh, what if is broken? You need a bigger oh my gosh, what if in your brain, because that bear will kill you. So stupid. Or a moose, dude. A moose, dude. You die. They're huge. You die.
Yeah.
You die. But there's a healthy degree of that, and then there's an unhealthy degree of that. So if your balance in oh my gosh, what ifing is not there, then look at that and work on that professionally, work on that with your doctor, work on that with your therapist, and work on that in yourself.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, my dad's an engineer, so he's a big logic numbers kind of guy.
Yeah.
And when we were kids and we'd go to the beach, we would always, as little kids, we'd be like, Dad, what if a shark eats us? Like, it could happen, right? And it could happen, right? Because there are shark attacks. It's not like they don't exist. But he would always break it down for us. He's like, look, there's only so many per year, and you can look at the numbers. And if you really think about it, like, your odds of doing that are so low. But every day you cross the street, and your odds of getting hit and injured when you cross the street is way higher than getting eaten by a shark. Mm-hmm. And yet you take that risk every day. Everybody does. It's just part of life. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like you have to break down that, you know what, some risks in life are acceptable, and you have to come to terms with the fact that there could be a negative outcome that comes with me crossing the street. But am I not going to cross the street and just live my whole life in fear, stuck in my house, not able to go to work, not able to go to school, not able to experience life? And you just have to accept that it could happen, but it probably won't. And that's okay.
That's cool. Use science and knowledge to kind of reason your way through. That's fun. One thing that I've done with my kids, again, I'm pretty optimistic. I'm like pretty positive, and I invite positivity and optimism into my life. I just do. It just happens. And call it manifesting. I guess they have fun words for it now. I don't know what that is, but it's true. If you are super, super positive, cool things line up for you. So I would take, oh my gosh, what if I had a client yesterday. She was telling me, like, I know that 99% of my life is wonderful. I'm just worried about the 1% of, oh my gosh, what if? And then I have to look at that and say, well, which one is more, and which one am I giving more of my emotions to? And I need to recalibrate that. It was very, very intelligent. Like what she said, it was super cool. But one thing that I do with my kids is teach them through games a little bit. So we'll play cards, or we'll play whatever games. And I don't know if you know this, but like, do you ever play games with your buds? Okay.
Yeah.
So is there like a couple people that tend to win a lot?
Yeah.
Tell me about these people that win a lot.
The people that win a lot tend to play, from my perspective, they tend to be cool with their decisions. They're not really worried about things. And it seems like risks work out for them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I know that can't be. It's there got to be some kind of,
there's something else at play.
Something else at play.
It's true. I win 98% of the time. I win. And my kids say that I cheat. And I might cheat on occasion just for fun because it's funny. But I don't do that. Right? But I think I win, right? And the winning frequency is not an oh my gosh, what if frequency. The winning frequency is, I'm going to win. I'm going to win. And you know what? I got dealt this hand, and I need this card to make it this hand, and I'm going to get that card. In fact, I'm going to get it right now. And you're going to cut to it, and you flip over that card. And it happens. and like the accountant father might say, well, the odds are not in your favor for blah, blah, blah. But the eternal optimist is like, it's going to happen again. Right. And you could say that way of thinking could be dangerous for like a gambler or, these kinds of folks. But I do it in game situations to just show them in life, don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Be courageous, be optimistic, be happy, be confident that you're going to win. You're going to win. It's going to happen. And you win. You just do. So I taught my daughter this, and now she beats me. And I'm a little bit mad about it, but I'm also really proud of her. I'm like, yeah, she gets it. She's like, no, Dad, it's actually going to be a 2 of clubs. And I'm like, dang, you trumped your
will trumped mine.
You just, yeah, what the heck? You manifested harder than I manifested. But I think that's really cool. And that's a really cool tool. If you can just tap into that way of thinking, that frequency. My mom taught me when I was little, I used to have some hard days and I think we all kind of get into the pity party thing and we kind of like to feel sad. It's kind of like crying and we're frustrated. And my mom one time, she's like, you know what, son, just smile and just move forward. And I'm like, what? I'm so hurt right now. You want me to smile for her? Gosh. And I just want to feel sad. She's like, you can keep feeling sad if you want to, or you can stop feeling sad and smile and go along with life. And I thought that was such a neat way of, I mean, she wasn't exactly emotionally validating me in my sorrow and pity. But she was showing me another way forward and another way of being and another way of thinking. There's a couple of good books like The Tao of Pooh, The Way of Piglet. I don't know if you've seen these books. They're like little Taoist books. They're cute. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. These are great little reads for folks to just kind of tap into that, like, I don't know. Taoism is neat in that, like, it kind of teaches some of the way of being rather than the doctrine of religion and thinking. And I think that's healthy. Like this eternal optimism stance, the thought that most people aren't out to get me. Most people are wonderful, beautiful humans and they are my friends. That's a pretty good thought process, actually. and it turns out that those folks that think kind of that way tend to have pretty good lives. And so I think if we can, I'm trying to teach my teenagers, right? Like how to turn on the switches of that winning frequency, how to find that optimism, that sense of, I don't know what that is, but I think it's about 582 hertz. I'm just kidding. I have no idea. but it is a literal brain frequency that you're just kind of humming along on. I've met some very, very, very successful business people. And it's interesting in my conversations with them, they have it. You can feel it.
Yeah.
Like you feel like $1 million when you're around them. And they're just really good at being optimistic and seeing things from this really cool way. It's not to say that they're not reasonable, they're not logic, they're reasoning. They still have all those spaces and they still can pull into the, oh my gosh, what if space, right? But they balance that and they balance it hard, really in a, I'm speaking 3 languages in my brain. They balance it in a direction that is strongly toward optimistic.
Yeah. They kind of, they exude confidence is what I would say, but it just seems like they think it's going to work out and it works out because
they also rejoice in other people's winning. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not competing with you. They get rid of that envy. Mm-hmm. It's gone. They're just like, cool, you just scored. That's awesome. Or you just scored a really great test score. That's congratulations. Wonderful. I think your future is going to be great. I think that gets rid of both of those kind of ways of thinking.
And the jealousy that comes with it too.
Yeah. And the envy and jealousy and all that. The third one that I was thinking of is I see folks get emotionally stuck in is I could have, I should have, I would have. I call it the coulda, shoulda, wouldas. and it creates, what emotion do you think this creates?
I would guess like sadness or regret.
Depression. Yeah. Depression. Man, if only I could have, I should have done that differently there, right? Hard on themselves, hard on their past, and they're stuck in that past. Just like the, oh my gosh, what ifers are stuck in the future. So again, meditation, mindfulness, breath work, mushroom foraging, like me. But anything that grounds you into the now, I think is really helpful to recalibrate some of those kind of emotional centers. Any thoughts or insights in that space at all?
Yeah, I think, like you're saying, I think what it really requires too, on top of it could be mushroom foraging, just going out and being nature. I think it's separating from social media. I think it's separating from the jealousy part that comes in, because part of the what if is you expect that there's a better outcome somewhere else.
Yeah.
And you only expect that if you've seen it, right? Like if there was some test that everyone failed and you failed, you probably don't feel like, oh, what if I had passed it, right?
Right.
You only feel that way if everybody passes and you feel like you're the only one who didn't. But it comes from that comparison that you do earlier, right? Like if you're comparing yourself to other people already, then you're going to fall into the, well, what if I had done this? Then I could have been like everyone else.
Right. What is the word for happiness in Spanish?
Contento.
Explain this to us, because I think it ties into what you're saying.
Yeah. It's when you're contento, you're content. It's almost like you're content with what you have. And it reminds me, I always think of the saying every time I think of the word contento. It's lento pero contento, and it means slow but happy or content.
That was your slogan at BYU. Lento pero contento. I'm sure it went over well with your professors.
They
I'm
loved
really
it.
slow, but I'm so content.
I'm so
right now.
content. Life could be better.
That's really cool.
But you see, at least I felt like I saw that on my mission. I saw people who were lento pero contento, in the sense that, like, even when they got older and they felt like they couldn't do things as well as they were no, estoy lento pero contento. Like I'm slow, but I'm happy. I'm able to just push through no matter what's going on with my life. I'm happy to accept it as it is.
This is not a cultural American way of thinking. It's not. And so how do we get there? You know, like I'll say, like, when I'm mushroom foraging, it is the slowest movement that my body has made in 46 years. I'm used to sports. I'm used to running, kicking, the pursuit of a goal. That will bring me happiness, right? Go. That's the goal. I want to go get a goal. And that will bring me happiness. I haven't lento pero contento. Like, I haven't slowed down and became content with where I'm at. And there's so much power in that way of thinking, where you're not pursuing happiness. You're content with where you are. And it's not to say that you're not ambitious. It's not to say that you're not going to go be successful in life and raise a family and have a good job. But you're content with where you are in a slow way, emotionally, intellectually. There's not very many slow things in our lives. There's not. Everything is high speed. Every 3 seconds changing, quick, this, right? Scrolling, doom scrolling. Yeah. And so there's not mindfulness and time to just be lento pero contento. It's so good. I love this phrase. That's cool. Yeah. So I think this is basically what I wanted to really chat about in that space, was just the emotionally and intellectual ability to change our minds. We talked mostly emotional here. Intellectually, I'll say we're very politically polarized, and it's not good for us as humans. It's just, we're all wonderful humans. I don't care where you're from, Democrats, Republicans, independents, they're humans, man, and they're great people. And can we find some contentment together? Can we find some space where we can just be friends and talk and be cordial and be professional and be kind? And there's too much of the toxicity and polarized thinking and intellectually polarizing ideas. And there are different ways of viewing the world. And is there a definite right or wrong? Yeah. But also no, because, one person's right or wrong is different than another person's right and wrong. And so how do we put our heads around that? Oh, that's, short circuiting some people's brains to do that. But to have some degree of mental flexibility and grace, to give grace to the other person and their thinking. I've been in those conversations where the person is like very offensive and very opinionated, and I've sometimes failed at like maintaining composure there, but it's the times when I have been able to maintain composure and talk and chat and really find that middle ground where we've had some really fruitful conversations and some great friendships come from that. Like, wow, you're a very different thinker, grew up totally different than I did. and we're both American.
Yeah.
And we're both, kind of cool people. And that's neat,
Yeah.
That's kind of the heartbeat of America.
Yeah. I think I don't know where I've heard this, but you have to try and understand what the person's thinking, where they come from, without coming in with judgment, in the sense that you can think it's wrong and you can think it's bad. That's okay. But you do have to understand where they're coming from and what they're thinking. Otherwise, you're just closing yourself off from connecting with them. And then I think once you do reach that connection, you can kind of get around how they're thinking, understand what they're coming from, what they're valuing. And I think that as human beings, we all value very similar things. I don't think there's huge, massive differences between different groups of people. When it comes down to very core values, I think people value a lot of the same things.
Yeah. Intellectual flexibility, an ability to understand and learn and change. In medicine, science changes all the time, and it's really hard. COVID was a great example, one that I love to talk about. Just kidding, it's terrible. It was tough. That was a tough time. But in COVID, science was way lagging. We didn't have science for this situation. And so people are very emotional. They were trying to apply basic principles of science and sometimes not applying basic principles of science. Actually, quite often not applying.
Yeah. I saw science be used in positive ways at the time, and I also saw it be used as a negative way. Some people used it as justification, where I think you understand that science doesn't necessarily come to quick conclusions on things, and it takes time sometimes, or at least a lot of effort. And I think sometimes people were too quick to accuse it of not being science at all, which wasn't necessarily true. And then other people were too quick to say, this is what they said, so it's 100% true.
Yeah.
There's no wiggle room there.
Right. We got so polarized in our thinking. Let's just look at masks. I mean, just masks work. A lot of the scientists were saying, well, they're not going to work. And some scientists were saying they probably will work to some degree this way. And so you had this different people based on common sense making these decisions. And that was really, really hard. Meanwhile, you had a study, Cochrane did a study on this. They're a big science research outfit. That's a good word for them. And they did a wonderful mask study and really proved it, right? So masks don't work for preventing COVID spread at all. And so, well, that's great news. Can we change our minds and now get rid of masks completely? Yes, is the answer. So you have doctors who are like, yeah, we should probably mask up because, there is some science that says maybe that will help. And then it turns out it doesn't help. So the docs hopefully will change their mind and say, actually, they don't work at all. So let's not do that. And when a client comes in and hears a doctor change stances, it's sometimes hard for them to, what do you mean? You just told me to wear a mask like 2 weeks ago, and now you're saying not to? 2 weeks ago, you said the treatment for this was this, and now the treatment's that? Yeah, it's changed, actually. And in fact, that thing doesn't work very well anymore. So science changes a lot. And as doctors, we have to have neuroplasticity. We have to keep up on medical education and be willing to change and grow. And I don't think it's a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
I think it's a sign of strength.
Yeah, I think this is kind of tying into that is my dad, when he's an engineer and he'll design bridges, and let's say his maximum load is like 1,000 pounds. That's not what it'll be, but let's say it's 1,000 pounds. He says, you never design for 1,000 pounds, you design for 10,000 pounds. There's so much degree of uncertainty because you never know what kind of other factors can come in. And I think during COVID, something that needed to be understood and that wasn't conveyed very well is there was a lot of uncertainty, even on the part of science. And so people with good intentions were trying to just take the extra step just in case, maybe we do masks and it works out great. Maybe it doesn't, but if we can get people in masks and it does help, then maybe it saves someone's lives. And if it doesn't, then what's the loss there? We spent on masks and we had to put on masks. And so I think when things did change, it was important for us to recognize that that's okay. We were just learning new things, and that we had come to better understand what we were up against.
Jacob, thanks for hanging out with me today on our podcast. This was really fun. To our listeners, I hope that you learned some good things. Really, we emphasized balance in our lives, emotionally, intellectually, physically, and with regard to diet. We talked about intellectual and emotional flexibility and maintaining a degree of emotional and intellectual flexibility. And we talked about 3 common pitfalls that people fall into: the comparing yourself to other thought process, and envy and jealousy and lack of self-worth, coulda, shoulda, wouldas, and the oh my gosh, what ifers. And those 3 thought processes specifically, if you're having some of that, be willing to look at it, seek change professionally with your doctor if you're struggling with depression or anxiety or panic attacks, and with a therapist to kind of try to rework the way that you're seeing the world. And then lastly, just allowing for change and depolarizing of our thinking. If we can pull ourselves out from the far right or the far left and find this middle ground of reason, logic, science, and at least just be willing to look at it and consider that you might not be correct. Lastly, I was up in the mountains foraging in sloth gear, lento pero contento, and I was very slow, and I was very contemplative, and I was smelling the air, and I was seeing, and I was finding a mushroom every once in a while. I was looking for king boletes, boletus edulis, and chanterelles, and I was finding quite a few. But while I was on this journey, it occurred to me that with regard to this thing that my wife and I had been disagreeing about, it occurred to me that I might be wrong. Super weird, Jacob. It was super, it was, but it's okay. Like I thought it was my responsibility to shore up the family, to make sure everything's in order, and to get mad if it's not, and to fix this and to fix that. And I just remembered up there thinking, what if that's not my job as a dad? That's what my dad did to me. But what if that wasn't correct? What if that's not right at this time in my life? And so I looked at it and I recalibrated it a little bit, and it significantly affected my relationship with my wife and my kids. And I'm like, oh, I don't have to be a jerk, and I can still get things done, and their intentions are great, and I can love them and their intentions. And anyway, that was just one small example of changing your mind. Like, it's hard, especially when you grow up that way. This is the way you've thought your whole life. Maybe change it. So, yeah. Thanks again, Jacob, for coming. And thanks for listening. I hope this helped you. Like and subscribe. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, social medias, Voyage Podcast, also on all the platforms. So hope this taught you some good things.